Hi, I'm Jeff Shester with the conservation group Oceana, and I'm going to talk about our progress toward authorizing pop-up fishing gear in the California Dungeness crab fishery. My co-authors are Casey Cooper, Kim Sawicki, Dave Toriumi, and Bart Chadwick. Recent California whale entanglement regulations now require management measures up to and including fishery enclosures for the Dungeness crab season during the early and late parts of the season, unless real-time data on the abundance of and concentrations of whales and turtles indicates low risk of entanglement. As a result, the crab season was closed early in 2019, 2020, and 2021, which had some severe economic impacts, particularly on those fishermen who rely heavily on the later part of the Dungeness crab season for their livelihoods. However, approved alternative gear is allowed in closed areas each season beginning April 1st, but as of now, no alternative gear has yet been approved by the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. The criteria for approving this alternative gear are as follows: detectability by enforcement and other fishers within a quarter mile, retrievability as evidenced by reliability trials showing gear loss rates less than 10%, the ability to identify the gear to the permit holder even when it's submerged, the benefit is in terms of reduction in entanglement risk, and enforceability such that enforcement officers must be able to find, retrieve, and redeploy the gear. So our goal is to get California to approve multiple pop-up gear systems to extend the Dungeness crab fishing season when entanglement risk is elevated for those fishers who voluntarily choose to use it. So last summer, we did some outreach events and dock trials and demonstrations in Monterey Bay and San Francisco areas. We looked at 5 different systems, including 3 acoustic release systems, including the FIO buoy, Edge Tech, and Desert Star. We also looked at 2 timed release systems, the Long Soaker and Subsea Sonics. We also did some at-sea trials and demonstrations initially with the gear to learn more about how this gear might work and be adapted for use in the Dungeness crab fishery, provide feedback to gear manufacturers, see what was working well, what wasn't, and also try to think about which setups made the most sense for initial gear authorization. In the process, we put some video cameras on and got some pretty killer videos. This is a video of a Desert Star bag looking up from a trap on the seafloor. You can see after it receives an acoustic release signal, the buoys are released up to the surface, which pulls the rope out of the bag through a sea of jellyfish up toward the surface where the ropeless gear can be retrieved. So a pathway to pop-up gear that we developed as a result of some of this experience really is kind of an iterative stepwise approach. This last summer, we selected certain gears for use and tried to modify and adapt them for the use in Dungeness crab fishing. This fall and winter, we are conducting reliability trials at sea under actual fishing conditions. And then we hope to do is by the spring of 2022, actually have applications submitted and approved for some initial gear authorization for the timed release pop-up systems. And then the following year, we hope to build on that work towards authorizing acoustic gear authorization so we can have on-demand acoustic release pop-up systems. And then in 2023 and beyond, try to scale up the use of these to larger sections of the Dungeness crab fishery along the West Coast, as well as explore the use of pop-up gear in other fisheries as well. So why do we start with the timed release pop-up gear? There's certainly some drawbacks. You've got to decide in advance how long to set the gear. Plans can change. It can be bad weather. You can't retrieve the gear early. And certainly some entanglement risk remains as the gear often pops up before the fisher is ready to actually be out there and retrieve the gear. However, we saw some real advantages in the sense that the pop-up gears with time release are a very simple technology, doesn't require acoustics or deck boxes or transducers, certainly more affordable. It can help build familiarity with the virtual gear marking systems. It's easier for enforcement to enforce without having to do the deck boxes and transducers. It does reduce risk relative to traditional gear, and we ultimately view it as a stepping stone towards the authorization of acoustic release systems. So in terms of our initial reliability trials, we looked at the Subsea Sonics TR4RT. We outfitted Dungeness crab traps with backup buoy fished during the rock crab season in Monterey Bay in September of 2021. And we deployed the gear at relatively shallow depths at first, 85 to 100 feet. We tested different buoy types, hard buoys, traditional buoys, as well as inflatable. And we also did basically about 50 trials at sea in Monterey Bay with a 30-minute to a 42-hour release delay time. You can see how the gear works here. This is the release mechanism that basically would release this rope holding a coil of gear on the top of a trap. We used a backup buoy to make sure that if there was any failure, we'd be able to retrieve the trap. So how this is set up is that backup buoy is attached down to an anchor weight, which then is attached to keep the backup line and buoy away from the pop-up gear and the crab trap itself, such that when the pop-up gear is released, it can go to the surface without interacting with the backup line. The vessel can retrieve the trap via the pop-up gear, reset the pop-up gear itself, and then redeploy that without ever pulling in the backup buoy. So we deployed this gear 50 times. This is one of the deployments showing the gear attached to the top of a trap being deployed to the seafloor. And we used a virtual gear marking app that allowed us to keep track of the deployment time of each of the gears, the pop-up delay that was set, when the gear was scheduled to pop up. And if we'd retrieved the gear already, it keeps track of when it was retrieved and also keeps track of the latitude, longitude. And it shows you a real-time map of where the gear is and whether it is popped up or whether it will be surfacing soon. The app is very simple to use. It's the push of a single button once you set the release delay, and it regularly syncs up to the cloud via a cell service. So you can actually track from remotely from any website where the gear is that's currently deployed. So the initial reliability trials had some, I think, very positive results. The buoys surfaced when and where we expected them to. All 50 times the gear did release successfully. However, 48 of the times there was a success, and 2 times we did have issues with the rope fouling up and getting tangled. This is one of those examples, and this tangle prevented the buoys from popping all the way up to the surface. However, the gear app worked and enabled us to remotely track the gear, and we saw that retrieval and redeployment efficiency by the fisher improved significantly over time. The next steps are to conduct some additional trials in deeper water with a longer soak time, improve the rope coiling, use some inflatable buoys rigged to go through the block hauler, and also ensure that the virtual gear marking app meets the criteria for approval by the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. So our goal is to submit an application for authorization this spring. We hope to authorize 1 or more timed release pop-up systems pending the results of the reliability trials. We propose to use a single virtual gear marking app for all the systems. And we believe that enforcement could randomly inspect the traps at preset release time to ensure enforceability and without giving fishermen notice that they're going to be a check. And if approved, we are excited that fishermen will have some entry-level options for continued fishing with pop-up gear during elevated entanglement risk beginning in April of 2022. And so looking ahead, if we're successful with the timed release and have good results there, there are some reliability trials already planned for this coming season, both by the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation as well as others for acoustic release pop-up gear. We'll need to train the law enforcement officers in acoustic gear retrieval and deployment, and also develop an interoperable virtual gear marking backend that allows the use of different multiple apps. So thank you very much for your attention. I'd be happy to take any questions.